Oh, hello. Welcome everyone back to Six Elemental Interviews on my channel, the John Kingdom Saga 7847. And for my esteemed guest, it's afternoon. For me, it's early morning, but wherever you are in the world, hello. Thanks for coming out to watch. And greetings, obviously, too, to those who will watch this later on. I've been so excited. The minute that she said yes, that I knew I was going to get a chance to talk to her, kind of one on one. I don't think I've ever been on a live with her, just her and I together, but this is, it's an amazing opportunity. Today I welcome a dear friend of mine, an absolutely phenomenal author, and even more incredible human being, the wonderful H.L. Tinsley. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Oh my gosh, like how can I possibly beat that introduction? I feel a little bit emotional now. Yeah, it is wonderful to see you, my friends. I must say, I feel like I haven't seen you for a while, so I am really excited to catch up and chat with you.
Yes, and so am I. Forgive me. This may meander a little bit because, and everyone else in the audience will have to forgive us as well. Because no secret, only our friends, and this is somewhat of a catch up. We're on opposite sides of the world. However, hopefully, and we've never met in person. Hopefully, we will one day. But in any case, Holly, you've been, I think, if I'm not mistaken, you've been on several events just this week. So in terms of catching up, let's kind of go with the present. What have you been doing recently? You were on all these lives. What was that all about?
Wow, so yeah, it's been a bit of a crazy week. So I think this week this is podcast number 4 that I've got booked in, and I've got a couple more in the pipeline. So it's been a really busy few months because I have stepped away a little bit from writing. There's a lot of stuff going on in the background, especially with the third book in my Vanguard series, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit. But in terms of my focus at the moment, I'm actually getting more involved with the writing community as a whole. So much more kind of engagement with the blogging side and the YouTube side. So not only have I been going and talking to some of my wonderful friends throughout the book community, I've also been working with Steve over at Page Chewing. So that's been a really exciting project. We have started a new series of podcasts, which is called Spotlight Chewing, which I'm really excited about. We did the second episode recorded yesterday, actually, with author DB Rook. That was a really good chat. So the premise behind that is that we are putting the spotlight, hence the name, onto all those cool, unusual, obscure, unique, wonderful indie projects that people probably haven't heard of, but really should have done. So amazing authors, amazing artists, game designers, shows, music, anything that is just cool and a little bit under the radar, we're trying to build a bit of a platform for. So lots of work on that. That's been amazing. I'm also doing my first author event this year, which I'm really excited about, which is happening in September in Shrewsbury, which is the fantasy and sci-fi spotlight event. So yeah, if people haven't heard about that, then they can come and check that out on my socials, and we have a website for that as well. But yeah, that's been taking up all my time recently.
Wow, well, that is a lot. That's quite a mouthful, but sounds incredible, really exciting. Um, I'm just wondering. So you said that, and this all sounds amazing. And folks, just as a quick note, check out essentially Steve Talks Books, a page chewing forum. It is amazing. It's something almost like, I don't want to say it's like a mini Reddit, but there's stuff about comics. There's, of course, Holly had mentioned what she's doing over there. There are so many amazing elements of that site. There's reviews. It's just a wonderful forum, a really great space. Check that out because I think you might find something that really interests you and draws you in. So, Holly, if I could ask, so you said you stepped away from writing. Sounds like you're doing all these amazing other things in the general book space. What's prompted this? led you to do more on the blogging side? I know you start off as both writer and blogger. Of course, writing has taken up a lot of your time, and you've enjoyed a lot of success with that. But so, why the change?
It's sort of a combination of a couple of different elements. So I bought out my most recent book, The Hallows, in March of this year. And once I'd written that, I kind of felt like I was in the position of being a little bit burnt out. And I knew I wanted to still remain within the kind of writing sphere, but I just wanted to give my brain a break from just kind of constantly focusing 100% on books. So although I have been writing, it's been much softer in the approach. So it's been more kind of mood driven, and I haven't put any kind of pressures on myself timeline wise. The second part of it was that for me, like a lot of independent authors, I released my first book during COVID. So I was a lockdown author, which meant that I kind of had never had that experience of engaging with the writing community in real life. So one of my goals for this year was that I wanted to go out into the real world and meet other authors and go to events and just see how that dynamic was different and how it worked. Unfortunately, when I started making inquiries, I was finding that either there weren't any events close to me that I could get to, or that the ones I could get to were already booked up. And I was looking for something that was, you know, I don't think anybody wants to go into their first event and have it be like a huge, massive thing where there's thousands of people. I mean, maybe some people do, I don't know. But for me, I wanted to start with something a little bit smaller, a little bit more intimate, and I just couldn't find anything. So I had a conversation with Phil Williams, who is an amazing author who I've had some great conversations with. And we were talking about the fact that where he lives down south, it's very similar. There are, a number of events that, you can go to, and they're all fantastic. However, it's very limited in terms of actually getting in as a part of the event itself, as opposed to just, going and attending. So the idea sparked of potentially putting on an event myself. So that was the second part. The third and final part of it is that for a long time, I have felt that I've been very fortunate in my writing career, that I've made some amazing friends. I have had some successes, I'm not a bestseller by any stretch of the imagination, but in terms of what I wanted to do in my writing career, I have achieved most of the goals I set for myself. And this is an industry where it really survives on give and take. And I felt I'd got to a position where I was taking more than I was giving, and I didn't feel comfortable with that. And I felt that by doing something like an event and doing spotlight chewing, that was a way that I could give something back and, provide maybe some opportunities for people who are up and coming or didn't know where to look, because it's difficult. I found it really hard. I didn't know where to go to find events to go to. I didn't know how to book a vendor table. All this stuff I have done with literally no knowledge of how it all works. And that's very daunting. So if I can take that away from someone else, that's, that's a good thing to do, I think. I hope.
Wow. And, I started out this introduction by saying what an incredible human you were. And I think what you just said just speaks to that, in that, when you said that and I think, Holly, you've definitely given back so much to the community. I know for me, you've always been a mentor and someone who's really helped guide me and shape my experience in this space. And so in my writing career, and I know you're very humble. I know you have done a lot prior to this to giving back. You've always been doing that, but it's interesting, that's one of the things that drove you to make some changes. And I'm wondering, I know for me, I definitely understand what you're saying, and I've done, some very smaller events, book signings, things like that. I've gone to a couple of cons, but yeah, it is funny when you realize that, there's so much of what I do and what I love that I don't really interact on with the level that I'd like to. So, but now you're starting to do all of these things, and there's some intent there, and you're giving some of your reasons. So, how's it going? How are you feeling about all this? Like now that you've made this kind of shift, how are you feeling about now meeting more and more of your friends and colleagues in the community live and doing these events and getting more involved in the other side and not as much more the somewhat more insular writing, just writing aspect? How are you feeling about everything?
I mean, it depends which side of it we're talking about, really. So, I mean, the actual creating of the events and the opportunities for other authors to be able to come and talk and showcase their work, that I mean, I'm excited about all of it, but that I find quite easy. So it's a lot of work, don't get me wrong, but I find like the project management side of things and kind of instigating these ideas probably more relaxing, whereas I think the public side of it, so, and I'm sure people don't believe me when I say this, but things like, you know, doing the spotlight chewing episodes with Steve, I love doing them. They're so much fun, but honestly, oh, my heart is going like this like all the time, because, you know, stepping up from you know, answering questions as I'm doing here with you, to being on the other side of it, asking the questions, driving a conversation, trying to make guests feel comfortable and able to talk, is no easy feat at all. I take my hat off to anyone who does it, and I am still learning. But yeah, I'm having a good time doing it. But the confidence, it's building. I'll say that.
Well, you have no reason not to be supremely confident. I, for one, can attest to the fact that you're so brilliant, you're so dynamic, and you talk about project management. Your project management skills are exceptional. You have essentially headed up anthologies for one. Actually, while we're on that topic, why don't we talk about the fact that you have headed and guided anthologies and been part of that, and how what a marvelous job you've done. I can bear witness to that with some of those projects. Can you talk about some of those things that you've been involved with?
Yeah, so the main one I think that you're probably referring to is the Anatomy of Fear, which was the Kickstarter project that we ran, which was to fund our fantasy horror anthology, which PL, you were kind enough to write the foreword for. So yeah, that project was about a year of my life, which was an amazing learning experience. And we had some fantastic authors involved. So we had the likes of Sean Crow, Crystal Matar, Zamil Akhtar, Ryan Howes, Bjorn Larson, Lacey Connolly, 12 authors altogether, all contributed an amazing, unique, original horror slash fantasy short story. And the end result was this book here,
Yes.
which I have. And yeah, it was really good fun to do this. It was like I say, about a year's worth of planning, going from getting the authors together, writing the stories, putting it on Kickstarter, managing the social media, and you know, I say that I project manage things, but you know, no man is an island. So there was a team behind it as well. So you know, we had Tim Hardy contributed massively to it, Lacey Connolly, who did our amazing formatting and made the book look absolutely gorgeous. It wasn't me alone. So yeah, I can't take 100% of the credit. just a little bit.
And again, you're so humble, and I can definitely verify that you were instrumental in steering the project and making it happen. And I think when we look at how well that turned out, and when you look at, I'm sure it's something you're immensely proud of, and it was, I'm sure it was something that, when you look back at your writing career, that's going to be a highlight. What is it like to steer a project like that, to work with so many different authors, managing people's different stories, their personalities, bringing a group together to write a book, especially if the book has somewhat of a central theme and if the stories are linked? Like, what's that like? It's something that if you think about it, it is actually massive in scope, and something that, as you said, is very time consuming, a labor of love, yes, but requires a lot of work. The Kickstarter aside, just actually getting the product right. What was that like?
I would say what's interesting is since I've done this, a few people have contacted me and, just asked for kind of advice on running projects like this and, the best approaches and how it works. And I think for things like this, it is so easy for it to turn into absolute chaos because, as much as I love them, authors, if you get a group of them together, it is like trying to herd a bunch of feral cats in one direction. I mean, I was so fortunate because the level of professionalism that all the authors brought. So there was no one late for deadlines. There was nobody who I was having to chase. Everybody was really on the ball. So from that perspective, I had a much easier job than other people probably would have. However, what I would say is with projects like this, what is so important is for you to have real solid leadership. And, I am, as you've mentioned, probably not someone to blow my own trumpet, but I think that from the beginning when we went in, it was all about having the confidence to know what the project was, what I wanted from it, and to say, okay, so here's how this is going to work. It was completely open for all of the authors, anyone involved in the project to have their voice, have their say. But what we had in place right from the outset was a really strongly defined set of boundaries and project guidelines. Everyone got a document that laid out everything that they needed to do, word count, content, how the book was going to look. And I think to have that level of preparation is really valuable. So I think if you are thinking about doing a project like this, is put a minimum of 3 months into planning just how the project is going to look, just what your goals are, how you're going to define those, then go out to your contributors, then go out to your authors and say, this is what we want to achieve. Does this align with something you would want to do? Does this appeal to you, your audience? Would you want to be a part of this? And, hopefully all the authors felt like throughout they could come and they could interject with their ideas. And, we had group chats where we talk about things like artwork. But you have to have the confidence to know when something is going to be a group decision, when something is going to be a leadership decision, and then all the other things around that drive it. So, it's great to have ideas about, we want to put out a certain artwork. If you don't have the budget for that, or you can't find the right artist, you need to be flexible. So you need to have plan A, plan B, plan C, and throughout that is what we had. So it was a labor of love that was great fun and really creative and really inspiring. But in the background behind that, there was a real kind of, machine at work with different people playing different parts.
Wow. Well, again, and I know, as you said, you're not one to toot your own horn, but it is a testament, certainly, to your leadership and your management skills to bring that all together. And kudos to you for successfully delivering on such a massive project. And nothing but great things I've heard in terms of the critical feedback for the anthology. It's very well regarded. So, and of course, I do want to quickly talk about specifically the Kickstarter element. Kickstarters, as an outsider looking in who's never run one, I've been involved. I was actually involved recently as part of an anthology that's coming out soon. But I certainly wasn't involved per se, other than boosting, etc. Kickstarters look really intimidating and look really nerve-wracking, and just the whole element of, the projects typically live or die on whether or not they're funded. Tell us about what it's like to manage a Kickstarter, what that process was like, and how you cope with the stress of, trying to deliver on this monetary goal that you need to actually make the project go forward.
So yeah, Kickstarters definitely are very stressful, and that much we learned very early on. I think in terms of when we went in, because we were so well planned, we did feel not confident, but we certainly felt like we had enough material to get a initial, sense of interest in it. What we realized probably after the first not even 6 weeks, getting around for a month, so probably after the first week, we realized very quickly that even though we had done an immense amount of planning, we had not done enough. And that was a real kind of shock to us, because we felt like we went in fully prepared. So I had done, artwork and graphics and social media posts and things like that. And we ran out of those within days. So it was an absolute mad scramble to think, what ideas can we come up with to get engagement and to boost this. We were pulling in, RJ Bailey was doing us audio clips. We were getting artwork done on the fly. It was constantly moving parts the entire time that the campaign was on. And I was really fortunate, and I am still really grateful to all the people throughout the writing community who, were not necessarily engaged with the project. They weren't necessarily authors within the book, who were reaching out, giving advice, giving help, boosting us on social media. It was a roller coaster that you could not get off for an entire month. And I think the great thing about it was we learned so much from that experience. I learned, firstly, the important parts of running a Kickstarter. So that is, it's not enough to have a great idea. And I think this is where some people fall down, is they have a fantastic idea and they go into Kickstarter and they don't get the backing that they want or that they're looking for. And they think it's because the idea is bad or because people don't want it. And that is very rarely the case. What it is that when you go onto Kickstarter, you have to have 90% of a finished product already there. So you've got to be able to say to people, this is what we're making. This is how far we've got with it. You've got to know your dates. You've got to know your production. And then obviously, people are going to be more willing to part with their money, because at the end of the day, that is what you're asking for. You're asking for someone to buy a product, not an idea. The other thing that I really learned was how amazingly receptive the author community is, and especially those authors who have had massive success with doing Kickstarters. And it was so easy to assume that, you've got these people who do these Kickstarters, you've got your Zach Argyles and your Ben Galleys. But, I'm not saying that anyone would think that they were, lofty celebrity types. But there's definitely a sense of intrepidation about approaching them and saying, it's like, please help with my tiny project, But they absolutely do. And they're so open and so giving. And, that's really part of what made me want to do projects where I could do that for other people, certainly not on the same scale, Don't get me wrong. Like, I don't think I'm ever quite going to be as prolific as the likes of Zach and Ben. But, it's seeing the way they interact with the people who are up and coming behind them. It just makes you realize that actually this is, again, it's an industry where no one is fighting each other, or at least they shouldn't be. Everybody needs to lift each other up.
Yes, and that's an excellent point. And I think, we, in our community, we forget that so many people are fighting the same battles, dealing with the same issues, and also so magnanimous and generous, and don't forget where they came from and how they started out, irrespective of the success they've enjoyed since those beginnings. And I think that's one of the strengths of our community, that when you talk about the Zach Argyles and the Ben Galleys, independent authors who've enjoyed what we would consider enormous success and longevity in the career, and then you see them come out and just support, regardless of the size and the scale of the project, just give so generous in giving their time. That's what this community is all about. So when you talked about why, you made this kind of shift from more focusing on the writing to really get involved in the community and realizing that you felt like you wanted to give back. You realize that as much as, yes, you're doing this give back, that will only draw more people giving you back more. And that's, I think, is also an absolutely wonderful feeling, when that you've made this conscious shift to give back, and now you're realizing, well, that only draws more people giving to you and to the things that you're doing. So I hope that was also something that made you feel really good.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think, for a lot of people at the moment, it's a really scary and it's a really difficult time to be an independent author. It's a scary and difficult time to be an independent anything. And you look on social media and you look on, the news and media and things like that, and it's all about how, everything's been taken away by everything, sorry, is being taken away from creative. Everything is being replaced by, big budget franchise stuff. The independent creator is getting pushed further and further down the line. We've got people worried about the rise of AI. We've got people worried about the lack of margin on books, so they can't make money. And I think at some point I just sat back and I thought, okay, so either I can get dragged into this, spiral of doom where I'm just going to end up sitting on my sofa, eating crisps and never writing anything ever again because, what's the point? Or I can start trying to help make these opportunities. I can start, and, I'm not taking on, the world. I'm not going to change anything massively. But actually, if enough people in the creative spheres and the indie spheres say, well, actually, do you know what? If you're going to take away our opportunity to sell books and promote them from this space, we're going to start creating our own. And we're going to start going out into the world and doing events and book tours. And, maybe we're never going to be able to change the way that things are going because the pool that we're in is getting smaller and smaller and harder to rise above the waters. But that doesn't mean we should give up. And that doesn't mean that we should encourage other people who are coming into the industry as new authors to think, well, do you know what? I've just come out with my new book and, well, the industry's over at this point. I've missed it. We need to adapt. We need to start creating those opportunities for ourselves. And yeah, I think the more we do that, I think the more we fight back against this spiral of negativity that I just see constantly.
Very wise and inspiring words. You certainly made me feel very motivated there, which you always have since I've known you. And I think that's one of the joys and appreciations I draw from our friendship, that you are so positive, you are so motivating, you are so wise, and that, you're someone who consistently and persistently wants to do the best for all, and while still respecting your craft and honing your craft. And again, I know we've been chatting about other things, but we will shift back towards your writing. But yeah, I think that's one of the things, Holly, that I most admire about you. And it's clear that you are a leader in this space. I know that's not necessarily a mantle that you necessarily thought that you would assume or felt that you would assume, but it's happened. So kudos to you for rising to the occasion and taking that on. I do want to speak about your writing journey and your writing career. So you got started, you wrote, a book that, became fairly successful, made it to the finals of SPFBO. How did all of this happen? Because this is kind of where things started in terms of this space for you, I would think. What were you doing before that? When and how did you get to this point specifically when this essentially blew up, became an SPFBO finalist, garnered a lot of acclaim and reviews in the indie sphere? How did all that come together in terms of the beginning of Vanguard?
Well, it's funny actually, because talking of creating your own opportunities, that's sort of how it started for me with writing. Because I've told this story a few times, but I started writing after being made redundant from a job that I was in, And it was, I think, maybe the third or fourth time that I'd been through a redundancy where I worked for a big company and it was swallowed up by a bigger company. And unfortunately, it was all kind of very negative experiences, not just for me, but for a lot of the people that work there, where we were just kind of thrown under the bus and, went from having careers that we really enjoyed, and don't get me wrong, I really loved what I was doing for a living at the time, to just being, here's the door, don't let it hit you on the way out, and after giving several years of my life over to doing this, I kind of found myself at a bit of an emotional and mental crossroads where I was like, okay, so I've had this experience now 4 times, and each time I've gone back into this same scenario where I'm doing a job that is extremely high pressured, extremely high stress, a lot of responsibility, and I've given 110% to it, and I've been left with nothing. And I didn't want that situation to happen again. And I thought, how do I get out of this? How do I change this cycle? So I had been writing for a while, just like hobby writing and doing little bits here and there. But my friends, my family had always encouraged me to try and do more of it. So I had a conversation with my husband and I said, okay, I really feel like I need to step back from the kind of work I've been doing and do something creative. I just need to see if I can take this project from start to finish. So we agreed that I would, and that I would take, possibly up to 6 months, maybe pushing a year off from full-time work to go into something that was a little bit easier. So I got like a little part-time job in the evenings that didn't really put too much stress on me. And the rest of the time I was just writing. So I wrote a novel. I wrote a traditional epic swords and sorcery fantasy, which I finished in 6 weeks. So it was a complete eye-opener for me, because I was writing from, I was getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and I was going to bed at like midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. I went full rabbit hole, absolutely obsessive. It was not the healthiest way to do that. I would just clarify this now. I do not do that anymore. But it did mean that within those 6 weeks, I'd written a book. So I started sending it out to trad publishers, because at the time I had never even heard of self-publishing. I didn't know what it was. And I got nowhere with it, which I now, looking back, understand was because the book was terrible and I hadn't learned any of the lessons that I needed to learn. But over the course of doing that, I learned a lot about writing. I learned a lot about my voice and my style. And I think about 3 to 4 months after finishing that book, I sat down and I wrote the opening lines of We Men of Ash and Shadow. And that book took a little bit longer because I'd learnt my lesson about rushing. So that took me probably about a year to write. And during that year, I also learned about self-publishing. I taught myself about marketing, about social media. I did a huge amount of reading. And yeah, I published on, I think it's September 2018. I can't quite remember the year now. But yeah, published in September, and the reaction was amazing. I was on the TBR Con in the January doing panels with Peter McLean, Ben Galley, Adrian Selby, which was amazing. I have no idea how that happened, but it was incredible to go from, let's just try and see if I can actually write a book, to having one out and being part of this community. So it's a very long answer there, PL. So I rambled on for a bit.
No rambling there. That was amazing. It's just incredible to learn about how, the success of We Man of Ash and Shadow, kind of the genesis, behind that. Just a shout out to the wonderful Frogentine. Thanks for stopping by. Good afternoon to you as well. Another prominent member of the Page Chewing Forum. We were speaking about page chewing earlier, so check out the Page Chewing Forum. So you you decide, you know what, I'm going to devote myself to writing. You write a book, and it comes out, and what happens then?
I mean, what happened next was pure blind panic for about 3 months afterwards. Yeah, it's so strange now because looking back, that initial period after the book came out, I don't really remember a whole lot of it because it was just so constant. So it was getting engaged with the community. So I was talking to reviewers, I was talking to book groups, and I mean, I was working on the second book at that point as well. And it was it was so strange because it seemed like everything went from 0 to 100 miles an hour within, maybe the space of about 8 weeks. And I think the difficult part was not immediately after the first book came out, but after the second one came out, because I kind of obviously wanted to take a bit of a gap between book 2 and book 3, and I stepped back and took a break, and it was like slamming the brakes on that car after being going at 100 miles per hour for probably the best part of 4 years of my life. And all of a sudden, I was like, I don't know what to do with myself now. I was like, just kind of looking in like all directions, thinking, well, now I've stopped. Like, how does real life work after bringing out a book? So I think that's actually a really important lesson to learn is, you've got to try and be balanced and still have that element of, real life and taking a break and taking a step back without panicking about it. And I can do that now. But the first 6 months after We Men came out, I did not dare stop. So I kind of burnt myself out a little bit because I was like, okay, this momentum's going now. I've got to keep going. I've got to keep going. And that is only sustainable for so long. So yeah, that's probably the lesson I learned from the 6 months after bringing out the first one.
So, were you prepared for the success, do you think? Looking back now, we prepared for the success. We prepared for an SBFBO finalist tag. What was that entire experience like? So surrounding this book specifically and everything that came with it, that essentially really launched your career into that upper stratosphere. What was all of that like? And do you feel, looking back now, you were ready for what that brought?
I mean, looking back, I think I probably was ready for it. I mean, I think success it's kind of we all measure success in different ways. So I knew that when I brought out the book, I had certain levels of achievement that I wanted. So I actually had a document that I want to sell so many copies. I want to be able to get to this star rating and keep it above that for this length of time. And, just kind of these little goals I'd set myself, which were mostly based on the rumors and legends of indie publishing, where people say, and this is quite topical at the moment, you're only ever going to sell 200 copies. You're only ever going to do this. So I was like, right, okay, these are my goals. I'm going to sell this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And I did all those things. Within the first year. So within the first year, the book had made back any money that I'd spent on it. So it was in profit. I hit my sales goals. And yeah, I think above and beyond that, in terms of success, I'd never really thought about it. We all have those dreams where we think we'd love to, be in the SBFBO. We'd all love to, be in the bestsellers list. We'd all love that little, flag on Amazon that says #1. But I'd never really considered that as part of the plan. Anything like that was always going to be a bonus to me. So I think the fact that I'd met my own goals meant I could be much more relaxed about anything else. I didn't feel that I was under any pressure to prove anything, or, I'd never made any public announcements of, I'm going to be this, that, or the other. So yeah, that did take a lot of the stress away. I think we all want our first book to be successful. We all want our first book to be something that everybody loves. However, I am a realist, and I knew that my book was always going to be, to quote our favourite term, a little bit Marmite. So, there are elements of it that don't suit every reader, as with any book. And I think I always knew that I was going to have a specific audience that was going to like my tone of voice. They were going to like the different shades of my book, and I was always writing for them. So to me, it was never a case of, oh, I'm going to write this book and like 100,000 people are going to buy it. It was a case of, oh, I'm going to write this book and maybe like 2,000 or 3,000 people are going to buy it, but they're really going to love it. Like, they're really going to like it because it is written for them. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I approached it.
Yeah, and I mean, kudos to you. Obviously, Holly, you've met all those nominal goals you set for yourself. You've surpassed them, right? You have a book that I think now is kind of enshrined in that indie lore, whereby and it's not about the average 4-point rating on Goodreads or the 400 plus reviews you have on Goodreads, and by most all those things, by the measure of most indies, you're successful. The sales, everything else, the prominence, the SBO finalist tag, all of being featured in Green Rock Magazine, Rising Star, all the accolades and things you've achieved. But I think when you talk about success and nailing those goals for yourself and exceeding them, were there things that surprised you about what you achieved? Was there anything that came out of left field that you weren't expecting about having a book that people talk about and put on their TBR videos and do reviews on? Like what was unexpected about how successful this book was and is?
In terms of what was unexpected, I think it's probably the same experience that a lot of authors have. And again, it goes back to this idea of the successful author being kind of lofty and on another level, and it's just that discovery that people really aren't. So I've been really fortunate, and I'm really grateful to have had support from some authors who, to me, these guys are absolute rock stars. So Peter McLean has always been exceptionally supportive of my writing career, and for really very little return, because I can shout out and say that Pete McLean's he's a great guy, he's a great author, but I'm small fry in comparison. So to discover that authors and writers, it's such a strange industry because it's so human and so connected. And I feel like I am probably being a bit of a broken record here, but yeah, I think that is surprising. You would never imagine, some rock star filling out stadiums to, spend the time supporting like some guy who's like busking with a guitar on the street. And it kind of feels like it's that same kind of vibe. So, these authors that are the rock stars are just, constantly happy to give back and talk to people and, share their experiences. So yeah, that kind of did surprise me a little bit, just that sheer level of, hi, I'm an absolute nobody who has no idea what they're doing, please help me. And they're like, yeah, sure, okay.
Have you felt a bit of the reverse scenario where new authors, especially indie authors starting out, looking at you as being, oh, it's H.L. Tinsley, it's Wee Man of Ash and Shadow, that author, have you felt a bit of the reverse sometimes when you felt, I'm still this, in your words, you're looking at the Peter McLeans, you're thinking, well, I'm the busker, they're the rock star, selling out stadiums. But then, as you know, there's always someone that looks up to someone else, right? So was it humbling? Like, how did you feel the first time you realized that there were authors out there looking up to you as that rock star?
I mean, I think I just thought it was a horrible mistake that they were making, to be honest. But no, no, seriously, I think, it's a funny thing about, how we measure success, PL, is that we will always feel like we're trailing behind the person in front of us. So we tend to forget that for someone else, we are that person in front. And, it's not a case of there's this person at the top and this person at the bottom. This ladder has got 1,000 rungs in it. And, people shift up, they shift down, they swap places. So when people reach out, and, I'm not going to lie, there has been people that have messaged me and said, can you give me advice on this? I'm always happy to do that. I'm always humble to do that. I'm always slightly confused by the fact that they've messaged me, but I will always do my best to try and steer them in the right direction. And I think this is the really important thing, is that it's about helping people to find those opportunities to do things for themselves and to learn. We can share our experiences, we can share what's worked for us, what hasn't worked for us, but that doesn't mean that, my success isn't going to translate the same way as, it would do for someone else. So, you could be emulating all the exact same things that I've done and you still wouldn't get the same result. So advice wise, I'll never say to anyone, this is what you should do. Like, that's just not the kind of advice that I want to give. I always say to people, this is what I did, this is what I learned from it. If I don't know the answer, go and ask this person, they're much wiser than me, and hopefully just help them out that way.
Well, again, you're very humble, and I do know there are quite a few authors who certainly look up to you as someone that that has quote unquote made it, that has achieved, that has been successful. So again, kudos to you, and I know you're humble, but yes, there are definitely people that I know in the writing community that certainly look up to you. So you get Women of Ash and Shadow, and you said that you were already pretty well working on, the next book, and the Cast of Bone, which was an incredible follow-up. Now, with this book, how did you feel when you got to this point? I think you and I, and especially you talked about our wonderful Marmite writing group, and folks, if you haven't seen our little Marmite chat on my channel, please check it out. It's a wonderful group of people who've come together, bonded by writing and trying to support each other. You went from We Men of Ash and Shadow, and by all accounts, and I think most of the critical reviews and things would agree that the Hand of Cast of Bone is phenomenal. It's a phenomenal follow-up. You and I have talked a lot about imposter syndrome, in our Marmite group, one-on-one chats, you and I. What was it like? Was it hard to get from We Men of Ash and Shadow to the Hand of Cast of Bone? How did you feel? Was it hard writing it? Where were you feeling after you finished in terms of Vanguard, and where you're going to take the series?
I mean, that's a loaded question there, PL. Yeah. I mean, I think moving from book 1 to book 2 was really, I mean, I don't really remember doing it. It kind of feels like it was one continuous flow. So there wasn't too much of a gap between me finishing the first and starting the second. And I think at that time as well I was on a real high. So the second book, I think, came out just as the SBFBO was coming to a close. So I think the second book came out in April and SBFBO finished in May. So I already had a whole bunch of stuff going on. Like, my emotions were like going crazy. So it all sort of blurred into one. The difficulty has come in moving from book 2 to book 3. So for anyone who hasn't already experienced it, and probably for a lot of authors that have done the series, is there is a fundamental shift between releasing book 1 and going to book 2 and releasing book 2 and going to book 3. Because book 1, you're kind of new to it and it's exciting and you kind of are naive to a lot of stuff. Book 2, kind of what you're doing a little bit more. You're just a little bit more aware of the various things that you could have done better, things that maybe you would change next time. Book 3, whole different ball game. whole different ball game, because by book 3 you know exactly where things can go wrong, and it's, to me, it kind of felt like a bit of a culture shock, because after book 2 there was such a ramping down of the engagement. So as I said, I took that break, I stepped away, and that momentum sort of just petered out and died. And that wasn't necessarily a bad thing, because I absolutely needed to take that break, but it just meant that that kind of connection to that buzz, that energy, it had kind of dissipated. So writing book 3 has actually been more of a challenge than I had expected. And part of that is because, I had to rebuild that momentum and I had to kind of get my head back into the right zone again. But also just because my idea of what the book was going to be and my idea of the storyline that I was going to follow has changed so much from book 1. So, you spend your time thinking, well, if I go down this path, how are the readers going to feel about it? And I'm not saying that everything has to please the reader, because you have to, as an author, write the book you want to write. But the reality of it is you do think about these things. You do worry, if I kill off this character, is everyone going to be really, really mad at me? Am I ready to let go of this person that's been in my head for several years? And I've talked to, a couple of the authors who said that they've had the same thing. And I think we ended up referring it to as, it's the third book wall. You're in the last third in the marathon and you just have that wall that comes up and you just got to try and break through it. So that's been a really tough part of the last year. And I am definitely seeing the end in sight now. I'm aiming to try and get book 3 to my editor by kind of the end of August is my goal. So we're nearly there. But yeah, it's been an emotional journey with book 3. And, I won't lie, Vanguard and I we've had times where we've had to take a little time out from each other.
And Holly, it's just so to hear you say that, and I so appreciate, hear you being able to express, the vulnerability and the fact that, writing isn't easy, and there's so many complexities that come with it, and so many things that, perhaps people who, if you've never written before, especially writing series. In this case, I want to correct for the readers. So it's going to be a trilogy. Vanguard is going to be 3 books. Correct?
Well, this is the question, Pale. So I am essentially writing one more book. However, depending on the length of it, I will either split that into 2 books or I will keep it as one. So at the moment, it's probably going to be 3 book series.
Okay, so 3 book series. So essentially, as you said, when you use the marathon analogy, this may be the end for Vanguard in the next book. So this may be the end of wrapping up this series, this incredible series that's become an indie gem. How does that feel, knowing that potentially that may be the end of the road with Vanguard, and either whether or not you split into 2 books or it's just one? How does that feel when, and maybe you can let the readers know how long the Vanguard has been in conception, and how does it feel now to be coming near the end of that journey?
So in terms of kind of the conception of the idea, I think Vanguard first popped into my head in about 2016. So if I were to bring out the 3rd book by next year, then we're looking at kind of 9 years that he's been living rent-free in my head and taking up space. But in terms of bringing the series to a conclusion, I'll be straight up honest, and I don't know if I'm ready. I think that's what's made it really difficult. I've written other projects, I've got other books on the go that I'm working with, and I'm really excited about them. But there's just something about your first book, your first character, that the emotional connection runs deep. It certainly does for me. And I think with Vanguard, there was so much of maybe not so much in the first book, but in the second one, there was so much of myself in that story and in the characters and the experiences that they had, maybe not literally, but certainly, you know, drawing from my experience and my perspectives, that I think the real fear for me with book 3 is not doing these characters justice. And that's taken me a long time to get my head round, is, you know, the fact that I could write this book and it could be great. I could write this book and it could be terrible. It is going to completely depend on the perspective of whoever is reading it and whoever picks it up. I can't make it perfect. And that's the bit that I have to get my head round, and that's the bit that I've been working on. So yeah, it's very much come down to me trying to find the confidence to write the story the way I need to write it, without worrying too much about, you know, who am I going to annoy? Who am I going to, you know, upset? Who's going to complain if I do it this way or, you know, that way? And yeah, it's been a hurdle to get over. It has.
Yeah, no, I can certainly appreciate how daunting that is. You know, I think when as a reader, as a fan of your work, I think for me, and I've said this in reviews, and I make no bones about this. This is simply my subjective opinion. Vanguard is one of my favorite fantasy characters of all time. Certainly in my top 25 favorite fantasy characters, specifically Vanguard of all time. And I think one of the reasons why your series has become an indie gem is specifically because of, yes, all your characters are absolutely wonderful, but I think Vanguard specifically is a character that resonates and stays with people, you know, after you close the pages of your books, and will live rent free in a few people's heads, as you know. What is it about Vanguard, you think, that makes him so compelling to readers? What makes him compelling to you? Because I think he's a big driver as to why your series has achieved the popularity it has. What is it about Vanguard that is just so incredible?
I think it's probably, you know, different for readers as it is for me, because obviously I write him, so I kind of know those deeper layers that maybe don't sit on the page, but you know, I know. Um, I think Vanguard is somebody who I relate to, um, from the sense that he is deeply vulnerable and afraid, not only of, you know, the world around him and how terrible it is, but also of himself, and, you know, the not just the physical capabilities he has, because he's, you know, he's a mercenary and he stabs people and does all sorts of unpleasant things, um, but I think just being afraid of who he is as a person. You know, he doesn't really love himself, he doesn't really value himself, but he continues on. He tries to live the best way that he can. And I think it's not just that he is comfortable with his imperfections, I think he is um, almost bolstered by them. So it's, you know, it's easy for Vanguard to say, oh, I am the way I am because I have these imperfections and I have these flaws. And what I like is just seeing beneath that and seeing somebody who is deeply caring and, you know, deeply loyal to his friends and the people that he cares about, particularly the people that he has lost, you know, his comrades in arms and his fellow soldiers that, you know, he fought in these wars with. Um, and the fact that he almost sees it as being his responsibility to carry them with him and to keep going in their name, but like at no point is he ever allowed to enjoy his life. You know, that's just not allowed. You know, he is there to serve a purpose, serve a function. And I think coming from the point of view of somebody who has been through, you know, some traumas and gone through therapies, and I've always been very open about this, I think having that character who doesn't know who he would be without that trauma, and is almost afraid to find out. So throughout the first and the second book, you start to see Vanguard push out of his comfort zone, start trying to grasp these little glimpses of, living a life outside of this box, this cage that he's built for himself, and trying to break through it. And I think that's it's fascinating to write about. It's fascinating, I think, to read about when I've read it in other characters. And hopefully that's part of the reason people enjoy him. It's because they're seeing that journey of wanting to come back to life.
Yeah, and I really, as again, as a reader, as a fan, I agree, and I find him irresistible as a character, and I feel like, and again, thank you for the courage in writing a character like that, and thank you for the courage of being willing to, as part of an expression of some of your own experiences, the darker experiences, the traumatic ones. We'll put that on the page. And if you'll indulge me for a second, one of my favorite authors and someone who I think we both admire, Jenny Wirtz, wrote a wonderful, very short review of We Men of Ash and Shadow. I do want to read quickly. She writes, gritty, dark, dystopian, told in a blunt staccato style that does not soften the themes, which are deeper than first glance would seem. What happens when a disillusioned war veteran, once with a moral compass, is broken down by events, and the impacts of war leave him the only survivor in his once heroic company? How does a broken world ruled by corruption and violence make use of desperate people cast down as society's refuse as tools of the violent and the greedy? And what happens when a genuine pampered rich boy turns psychopath and enters the arena to sate his rage? This book handles a range of downtrodden characters and their lives with unfiltered eyes, first revolting us, then gradually unveiling the twists and humanity and even the bravery twined through their characters as they seek to build something and make their way in a city so brutally violent, riddled with vice and corruption, they are thwarted and denied all but extremely limited choices. Jenny goes on to say, this book surprised me as it went with the sensitivity and the ruggedly loyal actions of characters once the story delved beneath surface appearances. Obviously, the inaugural book of a series, it did not leave me hanging at the finish. And I love this conclusion. Not a happy-go-lucky beach read, but grim and scary, and at times unafraid to stare down the ugliest motivations in human nature. Not for the squeamish, and not a read filled with joy and light, but a serious deep dive into the grim side told in a rough-cut, blunt, and quite admirable original style. A high praise from an iconic author of We Men of Ash and Shadow. Do you agree with Jenny's assessment of your work, especially in terms of how dark it is? Brilliant, but dark?
I think it's definitely not a sunny beachside holiday read, as she rightly said. It's funny, do you know what? Darkness, again, it's one of these things that it's so kind of subjective, and people have their varying degrees of tolerance for darkness. So, some people have said that We Men is just too dark for them, and they really couldn't, didn't get into it because it was just too much for them. Whereas I've had other people that have questioned whether it's even grimdark because it's just not dark enough. The one thing I will say is with this book and, probably most of the books I've written subsequently, is for me, the darkness always comes from the tone of the writing. It comes from the aesthetic and the themes of the writing. I don't tend to go so much for, the gore and the blood. I don't really do like big battle scenes. I like the subtlety of what is not on the page. And, that's not a reflection on me not wanting to use violence or having any particular, thoughts about people who do. It's just purely my preference for writing is to write, in a way that suggests rather than explicitly explains what is happening on the page. But yeah, there's certainly elements of darkness in there. There is elements of, there's a lot of characters who are undergoing traumatic experiences or have experienced trauma. There is certainly violence, there's abuse. Again, it's maybe not implicitly on the page, but the themes are addressed, and I hope that I've done them in a way that feels relevant to the story, feels relevant to the characters and their journeys and their experiences, and hopefully helps people to see the inner workings of this world and how things come to be as they are. I'd never do anything gratuitous. I think that's just not my style. But yeah, I'd say, Dulux color chart, it's probably like, mid-range, like on the gray scale.
Well, okay, but and that's I love your insights there, and you're eloquent as always. But I do want to somewhat push back and say that you, Tinsley, have earned the moniker of the Princess of Grimdark. Okay, and I want to get into that a bit. So, Grimdark magazine, one of I feel the most influential, publications regarding Grimdark and all things that are Grimdark, has named you a rising star in the past. I'm not sure who gave you first the moniker of the Princess of Grimdark. I'm going to get back to that in a second. But I think that most people in our space consider you, and I'm interested in how you consider yourself, as a Grimdark author. And the Princess of Grimdark moniker well earned. So how do you feel considering all that? I know you said that again, you don't go for the gratuitous stuff, and I feel, you so adroitly handle the dark stuff. You handle it so sensitively and with such care, but yet unflinchingly, and that's one thing I really respect of you as a writer. But Holly, you've been dubbed the Princess of Grimdark.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to say I'm not sure that the term "earned the moniker" is quite correct. I think I've been given the moniker, which endlessly amuses me, and it's one of the really sweet, joyful things about the community is that people have kind of picked up this idea. But yeah, I mean, it kind of confuses and yeah. I don't know, because I think I love the moniker, I love the nickname, but I don't really feel that it's anything more than just like a fun, silly thing that people say. You've got people who talk about like the Queen of Grimdark. And I think maybe it's just the fact that there's just not a lot of like women writers in Grimdark, so there's not a huge amount to choose from. So yeah, I don't know where that came from. I don't really know how it started. I'm delighted and bemused by it. But the funny thing is this whole thing about Grimdark came about because when I first brought Wee Men out, and it kind of started doing quite well in the Grimdark circles. So a couple of like Facebook groups and reviewers and things like that. And I think it just got this kind of term that I've kind of had pinned on me, and it's not a complaint in any way at all. But I actually think that since then, my work has probably started to move away a little less into the grimdark and certainly more into the gas lamp. So, as amused as I am, and as much as I love the grimdark circles, and I certainly love reading grimdark stuff, I think I kind of sit on the periphery at this point, and I would say the stuff that I do kind of fits more into the gas lamp side of things. So, not trying to compare myself to the people, but the likes of Treaty Skies and Crystal Matar, I think we all kind of float in that same pool a little bit, which is great because they're both amazing authors and genuinely have been really supportive to me throughout my career, both in The Anatomy of Fear. But yeah, it's the grimdark thing. It's a funny one, and I don't really know how to answer that one, PL. So I'm just going to stop waffling now.
Well, again, you're also very, very humble, and Anna Smith Spark, whose sobriquet is the queen of grimdark. When I look at two brilliant authors, you and her, that I immensely respect for their craft in the field. I think, and again, this is my subjective opinion. If I go by degrees, I think she is somewhat darker than you are. She takes it that extra step, but yet you both share this ability I talked about to really adeptly handle these really dark. I mean, I don't think anyone would argue that We Men of Ash and Shadow and Vanguard, The Hand That Casts Bone, this is dark stuff, right? And Vanguard is not Jory Ankarth from Mark Lewis's Broken Empire series. He's not Sandan Glokta from Joe Abercrombie's series, but he is someone who is very, very conflicted and gray, someone who is burnt out. He's disgruntled. He's a shell. He's a killer. He's tortured by what he's seen and done. He works for a tyrannical mob boss who he despises, but he's a man who's got this layer of integrity that's clearly there and heart underneath. And I think that's what makes him so fascinating. But I mean, so we're just talking about the character here now, but when you look at the setting and everything else about your series, like Dorsey it's grim, it's sinister, organized crime, it's like it's this place where corruption flourishes. It's just this really, you talked about the gaslight element, and I think I said this in my review. It just reminds me of the 1910, like the Jack the Ripper-esque, like brooding, like sister, like something bad is, always imminent. It's I for someone who started out, reading a bit more of the high fantasy fare and then got into the darkness and really was drawn to the darker books more and more. I don't know what that says about me, but as I got older, I kept getting drawn more and more to the darker books. Yours was one of the ones that really, your book is probably one of the ones most responsible for drawing me into that darker type fantasy and craving it. What is it you think about human nature why is grimdark so popular? Why do we love this? Like, you're about these tortured, characters, these horrible settings where people are oppressed, and what is it that draws us, you think, to these type of books?
Well, first of all, I mean, I love the idea that I've drawn you to the dark side. I'm genuinely really proud of that. But it's one of these conversations that I've had so many times with people, and everyone's got their own kind of interpretation of what grim dark is and why people are drawn to it. And essentially, I think it always just comes down to the human element of human element, even trying to say that right, of curiosity and wanting to understand and put almost like a logical slant on something that is an emotional experience. So, we all know that a lack of knowledge is the biggest driver of fear. So, let's be honest, with people, fear dying, they fear, horrible, painful things happening to them because we don't know what happens next. We have this lack of clarity, this lack of knowledge and understanding. And I think we feel maybe not comforted, but we feel more able to rationalize and understand and be empathetic when we approach these subjects and lay them out on the table and are able to see how we feel about them and see how we react to them. And I think grimdark does that through fiction in a very tangible and very real way. So I think people are drawn to grimdark for the same reason that they are drawn to murder documentaries and they are drawn to criminal psychology profiles. I mean, let's face it, true crime podcasts are one of the biggest genres out there, and it's not because, you know, millions of people are thinking, oh, murder's great, you know, let's all hear about that. It's curiosity, because they want to know, how did this situation happen, you know, what were the details, why is this person this way, how did this, you know, come to pass. And I think it's just a really natural human trait to be curious about things like that.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. And you know, and when I think that what writers like you do with those themes and how you package it into something that is that we can't look away, and we can't not help but see our own fears and issues and trauma, but yet it is cathartic as well, I think, when we read books like that, and it strikes a chord that's kind of primal in there. And I really do, again, you know, thank you for bringing me to the dark side. I hold you largely responsible. So and you seem to be quite proud of that. So that's that's all good. Just a quick, the wonderful, another page chewing alumnus, the wonderful Leila Gushi. Good morning. I just logged in, but I'll go back and list everything. Just now looking at Holly's books on Amazon too. Can't recommend them highly enough, Leila. You would love, you know, the Vanguard Chronicles and Holly's latest book, The Hallows, which we're going to talk about soon. Leila is a wonderful, esteemed academic, a professor, a brilliant. Check out Baladi magazine and her YouTube channel. Leila is amazing and just a warm and wonderful person in the community. I agree with everything Holly's saying about grimdark and true crime fans. I'm one of those fans. Yeah. Oh, I didn't know you were a true crime fan. Okay, awesome. That's great to know about you. So I think, and when you talk about grimdark, Holly, I still, and this is my personal opinion, we need to hear from the source, the author herself. I feel that The Hallows, your most recent work, another phenomenal book. I wish I had it. I don't have my copy yet, but it's on the way. But I was graced from you with an arc, of which I am extremely grateful. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to read your work. The Hallows was absolutely fantastic. It's funny too. We talked about this on our Marmite discussion. One of the beautiful things about being part of a writing group, to have these friends and colleagues and supporters, is to watch your friends just, sharpen their craft, hone it, become, they're brilliant. You can see how talented they are. Their first books are great, and then the subsequent books become even better and better. And certainly with the Hallows, Holly, did yourself, I thought it was absolutely phenomenal. It is, I feel, still very dark, and still for me personally on that grimdark track. Can you talk a bit, please, about the Hallows specifically? And you decided to depart from Vanguard, for a bit, and so obviously you continued to write, and you chose to write this book. Can you talk about why, what the Hallows is about, why you decided to deviate temporarily from Vanguard and write this particular book?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, I kind of got to the point where I think me and Vanguard just needed to have a bit of a break from each other. But I didn't want to completely stop writing. I wanted to sort of, do something else for a little bit. And I really wanted to try and challenge myself to write a book that was, quite significantly different to Vanguard. And I think that the Hallows is. I do appreciate that it is sort of, still that kind of dark. It's a little bit later than Gaslamp, so this is a kind of more 1920s aesthetic. So there's definitely still the Tinsley traits in there that Vanguard had, but it's a very different book. It's a very different story. So I had this idea for Camellia, who is the main character. and it was really just a kind of a one image flash that I had of this character and what he might look like and how he might kind of present himself to the world. And I thought, okay, I'll sit down and I'll write this book and I'll see where it goes. And I think I put it might have been like a Facebook post or a Twitter post or something like that. And I put something about that I'd started writing this book that was an urban fantasy with like drugs and nuns and flying like lizard people. And I think a couple of people were like, okay, you've put this out into the world now, so you've really made a rod for your own back because this has got to happen now. So yeah, so it did. So it's this one here, which is the Hallows, which came out in March. And it is, as mentioned, it's a 1920s aesthetic urban fantasy. It is a bit of a mixture of grimdark, horror, fantasy, kind of dark comedy, urban. It's a real kind of, it's a soup of genres, which hopefully work well together to deliver something that's a little bit unusual. And yeah, I think what I enjoyed about writing this one was the opportunity to bring in something more whimsical. So I am quite inspired by, I love a magic system, but I really like the magic systems that are based in either biology or science. So the idea of writing a book about a magical drug really appealed to me, which is, of course, the Hallow, which is the kind of central theme running through the book. And yeah, so it's just been an absolute joy to write something and to be able to be, a bit funny and a bit weird and create these crazy characters. So yeah, yeah.
Well, I can definitely attest that. Wow, the house is phenomenal. I think there was always, if I could speak personally, what I loved about the book, there was always in the Vanguard Chronicles, one of your skills as a writer that you definitely, and I can see, knowing you a bit as your friend, that it's definitely part of you, is this the ironic, dry, snarky British humor that you bring to Vanguard. Definitely, I feel, for me, came even more to the forefront in the Hallows, and I absolutely loved it. I was howling at some parts. It just, your wit was just phenomenal. Um, with the Hallows, I felt there was, as much as there's a lot of compelling themes and social commentary in Vanguard, they really jumped out to me though, in the Hallows, with, I think, even more intent. I'm not sure if that was the case and how you wrote it, but can you speak a bit about the themes and some of the things that you want to explore in the Hallows, perhaps a bit different from the social commentary in Vanguard, and how they manifested in the book?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me the biggest difference was that with the Vanguard books, it is very much, although there is a supporting cast of characters, it's about how the social themes and all these different elements of the world really impact the one character. And a lot of that is down to his interpretation and his perspective of how the world works. Whereas with the Hallows, um, from the outset, I was very keen to make the social themes not just a key element of the world, but really the driving force behind it. So in the Hallows, the world that we're in, you have two different kind of races of people. So you have people who are just human and kind of, as you would expect. And then you have the old bloods who look nominally human, but can take this magical drug, which will have different effects on them, both physically and kind of mentally. And really everything about the world is driven by this, the kind of the commoditization of this drug. So, it's manufactured, it's part of daily life, it's used by workers, it drives the economy. but it also has a connection to the faith of the Old Bloods, so their religion that they've had for thousands of years. It forms like a deeply traditional and ceremonial purpose for them as well. So I think having that kind of central thread of storyline, which could branch out to look at, okay, so how do the politics of this world work? How does the economy work? How does the religion work? It gave me so much interesting stuff to play with, so I could ask questions and I could, think about how characters would respond. And the whole thing about Camelia's journey throughout this book is not just for him, but for all the people around him. They are living in a world where they are trying to maintain their traditions, their kind of cultural, roots that have been embedded into them, and transition them into this modern world. Work out how is that going to work? Where do they fit in? What are the pitfalls of this? And I think that that's something that we've seen, countless times throughout history as time periods have moved on, and people kind of, they panic and they fear the change, and some people embrace it and some people try to stop it. And it's a really rich, interesting way to work with a story. I think it was certainly a lot of fun.
Certainly had a lot of fun reading it. Just quickly, the wonderful Thomas Devins here. Thanks so much, Thomas, for stopping by. Thomas has jumped in here late, but while I regularly haven't gotten around to reading the Hallows yet, I can say that both the Vanguard books were among my favorite reads of the past few years. No surprise there. They are amazing books. So thank you, Thomas, for that comment. You in the Hallows and in my reviews, I specifically talked about some of the themes, and you had spoken earlier, Holly, about why you got into writing in the first place, and what your experience kind of in the corporate world. And that was something that and of course, having known a bit of your backstory, I just thought it was wonderfully integrated. And I mentioned in my reviews, one of the themes of this feeling of being part of this long-standing organization, and you're wondering if, does my contribution really matter? Am I just a number? Like, at the minute I walk at the door, am I forgotten and just quickly replaced? And yet you're part of this organization. You make these relationships and you form these really deep connections with your colleagues, and you have this esprit de corps, and you face all these challenges together. And I just thought that was so well done. And so I'm guessing that was something intentional and purposeful that you brought to that book from your own experiences. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It was certainly intentional. I don't know how much of it was brought from my own experiences, but certainly from the experiences of people that I've known and, have had kind of relationships with, where they've shown kind of parts of themselves, certainly in relation to people I've known who work in service, so people who have been involved in the police, the military, and what actually kind of amuses me is that some people who've come back to me and talked to me about the Hallows have said, oh, I kind of get it, it's talking about big corporations and big businesses and the kind of faceless organizations, which sort of is a little bit, but it's mostly talking about the plight and the conflict that people who work in service face, and this idea of, am I making a difference? I'm going out and I'm going to do a job every day that is dangerous, and not everybody agrees with what we're doing, not everybody is happy to see us. Are we here for the greater good? Are we doing right? And it is an incredible conflict to go through, and the only people who can really understand that conflict are the comrades and the colleagues around you who are experiencing it as well. So I think for me it was really important to try and get that sense of found family and brotherhood and shared experience between Cam and all the people around him, because like anyone who is in that position, they're there to do the best they can. They're there to, try and make a difference and try and be part of something that is for the greater good, but they don't necessarily always agree with every decision. They don't just, there's not every person that they meet has got good intentions, and it's hard for them. It's tough, and it's something that they constantly have to grapple with.
Yeah, so well said. And you can imagine, of course, that theme, is near and dear to my heart, based on my career. So, and again, it was just so well done. And, I think, Holly, one of the reasons why you're such a phenomenal writer is your ability to look at the world, interpret it a certain way, and then bring that interpretation to the page effectively. That strikes that chord with all of us when we read it. I just want to ask you, what are some of the books and works that do that for you? Whether there are inspirations for your own work, or in general, just in your general reading, and authors that strike that chord for you, if you can speak about.
That's a good question, because I think I tend to read quite different books to what I write. I know that there's certainly authors that have inspired me. Anne Rice, her style of writing has always been an inspiration to me, and I think that there's a lot of the way that she approaches like societal expectations and kind of how that affects the characters. You look at sorry, I feel like I'm going to cough. Interview with the Vampire, and the character of Lestat, and how he was written. I certainly see a lot of how I approach characters in that. I'm trying to think now who else. I mean, I don't know necessarily that I would ever say we write similar stuff, but similar to UPL, Bernard Cornwell is, for me as a writer, is just really phenomenal. It's like you just got a whole like shelf just dedicated to Bernard Cornwell. So I actually finished The Last Kingdom about 2 days ago, which is the first time I've actually read the books. I've watched the TV series, but never actually read the series. I have read his other series, some of them several times. So I'm excited to move on to book 2 of that. I think in the indie sphere as well, there are certain authors who maybe not necessarily writing in the same way that I do, but certainly in the way that they approach their writing. So I know I've mentioned a few times, but Sean Crowe, his approach to writing, his style really speaks to me. He has a way of bringing everything down to a very human level. And, some of his books are talking about high technology, fancy weapons, and computer technical stuff that I can't even describe, let alone explain. But it all feels so real. It all feels so, like this could just absolutely be like, yeah, of course there would be a cyborg Viking walking around. Why wouldn't there be? And I do really admire that skill to make something that is so crazy and so out there feel so natural and so real and completely believable.
Yeah, no, again, some fabulous authors you mentioned. It's funny, I never, that's a great comparator. I thought I'd think about Interview with the Vampire Lestat, a tragic character, yet obviously someone who, is complicated. Then when I think about Vanguard and that relationship, yeah, and Sean Crowe, brilliant author, one of the Marmite alumnus, and I've only had the pleasure of reading one of his books, but really enjoyed it, Godless Lands, and just that someone who again is able to capture the darkness of the human condition and the kind of depravity and things we're capable of, but yet the goodness as well. So I love that aspect of his writing specifically. So yeah, no, that is you're right. So tell me, Holly. So you've written the Hallows. Is it a standalone? Will there be a sequel? What will we see in terms of that universe?
I mean, I don't know. The door is open for it. The book itself is a standalone, so if I never write another one in this world again, the story is closed out. However, there is a lot of scope for like other characters to have their own storylines. I know that there's two characters in particular that I've had quite a few messages about on Twitter and things, with people saying, can we have a little bit more of this? So yeah, I know PL knows exactly who I'm talking about. But we'll see. It's a case of we'll watch this space. I have no firm plans at the moment. I want to get Vanguard 3 done. I then have another book in the works after that, which was kind of introed in the Advent of Winter anthology. So yeah, those two will be my focus, I think.
Okay. So in general, and thank you so much for sharing what's coming up in terms of projects. Where do you see, if you had a crystal ball, where do you see the next? You've kind of mentioned that 10-year conception of Vanguard here when you first started, when you first conceived the idea. Now, obviously, it's the series is again an indie gem. Where do you, and you've talked about all you've done, all you're doing in the general community, the writing community sphere, trying to give back, and all the amazing projects you worked on. Where do you, if you have a crystal ball, where do you foresee, or where would you like to see the next 10 years of your career going?
Oh, that is a good question. I think it's hard to see anything that long term. I mean, I certainly want to still be writing in 10 years. I certainly want to still be writing in 20 years. But in terms of things that I would maybe want to achieve, I think I would like to start to feel, 10 years from now that I will be a lot more confident about the engagement side of things. So, whether that's podcasting or blogging, and just putting myself out there more as a person and not necessarily, you know, as a figure behind a book. Uh, I would certainly like to think that the event side of things we could start to scale up so that we could maybe go to different locations, maybe do like some 2-day events and things like that. And yeah, I mean, writing wise, I once book 3 is out the way, I am toying with the idea of doing like a special release, limited edition run, maybe doing some hardbacks, maybe doing some special edition covers, which is extremely self-serving of me. But I just feel like at that point, it'll be 10 years since, I started writing more or less. It would be a nice way to like mark the occasion and have a bit of a milestone. So yeah, I'll think about that and see if there's any interest in it. And if there is, maybe that's something that will happen over the next kind of 18 months to 2 years.
Well, it sounds amazing. I certainly look forward to having a special edition of your books adorn my shelves. I'd be running out to pick that up. Um, and I know, again, we know about your humility. And is there any specific advice or guidance you'd like to give to in the author specifically breaking into the industry, someone who's working on their first book, perhaps about to be released, perhaps they've just launched their first book, looking back on all the knowledge and the expertise you've accumulated over your career so far and what you've learned, is there any specific advice you'd like to give to someone like that of how to perhaps help put their career on the right track?
Um, I think what I would probably say is that this is a piece of advice that I have really given myself probably in the last, certainly in the last 6 months, and very much so in the last few weeks. It's the kind of cliche old saying of you're going to regret 100% of the chances that you don't take. And it's very easy to, like we've mentioned, feel that, there's imposter syndrome, those voices in your head saying, oh, well, you shouldn't do this. And, if you put yourself out there, it could go wrong, or people could laugh at you, or people might not like you. Um, all of which is true because everyone has their own opinions and everybody likes different things. But it's important to remember that if you don't do something because you're worried about how other people react to you, that serves nobody. It doesn't make your life any better. It doesn't make their life any better. It has no effect on them because they're not the person that's putting some out there. But if you're writing a book or making a piece of art and you are worried about whether it's good enough or whether it's going to appeal or whether it's going to sell 1,000 copies, just try and stop worrying about it. I know that is not easy, and it is still something that I have to work on daily. But at the end of the day, if you don't do it, then, you know, what have you gained? What have you gained from it? You know, you've gained nothing by not doing it, and you could gain something from doing it. So do it. If it doesn't work out, it's not the end of the world. Learn something from it. Go back, try again. And yeah, this is kind of my mantra at the moment: is you regret 100% of the chances that you don't take.
That's an amazing piece of advice, Holly, and one that I take to heart, and one that I've taken from you over the years, especially as you know me better than most people in this space. That, you know, writing a series that some may not take to for whatever reasons, or that may be considered controversial, or is something that is Marmite, as we all talked about, is not easy. And you know, I think that one of the reasons, you know, primarily, of course, my lovely wife Deb is my partner in all things, but definitely my closest group of writing friends, you and all the Marmites, and you, as I've talked about, as being such a leader and someone who's always, you know, been quite candid, yet sensitive with your opinions and your feedback. You've been someone who's definitely encouraged me to keep going, and one of the people that I look to, you know, when you're having those days where you're like, oh, you know, and you've definitely been instrumental in pushing me forward. So thank you for that. I want to thank you for that. That's been huge in my life. So thank you.
Oh, no, thank you. And I'm really glad to hear that. And I think, yeah, you absolutely just need to keep going with what you're doing, because what you're doing is important and has so much value.
Thank you for that, Holly. So as we wind down, I want to give you the opportunity, Holly, to let the viewers know where to reach you on social media. You know, they are in, of course, in this video below, all the links, but you know, yeah, where to reach you, where to buy your books. You can talk about page tuning forum and things you're doing there, and anything else you have on the go. Please let the audience know.
Absolutely. Okay, so this list is getting longer and longer now. So if people want to find me, they can find me on Twitter, which is at Holly Tinsley, and the E in Tinsley is a 3. You can also find me at my website, which is www.hltinsleywrites.co.uk. I think it's in my Twitter, either way. You can also find me over on the page tuning forums, as mentioned. We are doing the Spotlight Chewing podcast once a month at the moment. And we are always welcoming any recommendations for indie projects, creatives that people would like us to talk about. Please come to the forums, drop them in the chat and let us know about them, and we will shout them out. Also run the Dice Chewing online RPG games. So we're currently doing our first D&D campaign, which we do have a group of regular players. However, anyone who wants to come along and have a go, or maybe do a one-shot, is very welcome. Again, pathway to forums, just come and let us know that you are interested in joining us. It would be great to see you. And my books are available on Amazon, and they are the Vanguard Chronicles are available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook, and the Hallows is currently available in paperback and ebook as well.
Fantastic. And you know, I think again, Holly, you remain not just a dear friend, but one of my favorite independent authors, especially of grimdark. I still will hold to and maintain that your tiara as the Princess of Grimdark is well earned. You know, it's been an honor and a pleasure to have you on my channel as always. I hope you'll do me the honor of coming back again in the future and chatting some more, especially after you've gotten a few more of your upcoming projects released and out in the space. For everybody that's watching as well, of course, I'm P.L. Stewart. The Drowned Kingdom Saga 7847 is my channel for the books. The Drowned Kingdom Saga behind me, That's www.plstewart.com. My books, again, on Amazon. Check out Goodreads, and of course, author signed copies available via the website. And of course, you can see me here doing 6 elemental interviews with incredible guests such as Holly, and beside my partner Taylor from Made Between the Pages, doing page chewing, of which we have actually an episode tonight with the brilliant Mike Talks Books. So check that one out at 8 p.m. Eastern. But right now, I just want to say one more immense thank you, Holly, for doing me the honor of being able to interview you. This has been incredible, and I've enjoyed every minute. Could talk for hours, of course, but I want to be respectful of your time. And I want to say I really appreciate you joining, and thank you so much for doing so.
Oh, no, thank you so much. It's absolutely always a joy to speak to you.
Thank you. And everyone, thank you who has stopped by in the chat. Your comments, people who watch live, it's part of what makes this long form content so incredible. And of course, thank you to everyone who's going to watch the replay down the road. Okay, once again, it's PL and Holly signing off from this interview, and we will talk to you all soon. Bye-bye now.